And Carm, I'll leave it up to you to begin. Thank you.
Great. So can everyone hear me? All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining this afternoon. Um, I'm Carmen McDonald. I'm the Director of Education for UXPA, and I am your co-host for today's webinar. I'm super excited to be co-hosting this webinar with our experts from Essential Accessibility. It's a comprehensive accessibility as a service platform. And before we get right in, I want to basically tell you guys there's a few things to note. As those of you who have joined previously, if you heard Eric, this particular webinar is going to have live captioning. All audio is going to be muted with the exception of our speakers today. We will have Q&A towards the end of the discussion, so please feel free to drop questions in the Q&A control panel. We will try to answer as many as we can during the webinar, but we will follow up with answers to questions if we do not get to all of them today. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available at the conclusion of this talk. So look for the email from UXPA that has a link to the recording and additional resources that Essential Accessibility will provide. Last but not least, we do have an upcoming webinar, September 27th, and it's Agile Scrum for UX and product teams, and it's going to be a panel. So please look out for that and join us if you can. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you guys to our presenters for today from Essential Accessibility. We have Kara Zirkle. She's Essential Accessibility's Manager of Compliance and Training. She has over 17 years of experience working in the disability field and actively advocates for and educates the world about web accessibility, assistive technologies, and the laws that protect individuals with disabilities. She has a strong knowledge of universal design and the importance of incorporating it into educational and work settings. And last but not least, we have Eric Feinberg. He is the Chief Marketing Officer at Essential Accessibility, and his entire career has been focused on helping to ensure great customer experience for all people in the world. So, if we can, please, Kara and Eric, take it away.
Thank you so much, Carm, and thank you to the UXPA for bringing these wonderful folks here. Who's excited to be here today? I know I am. And by the way, nearly 1,000 people registered for this webinar. And so I just want you to know that if you're interested in universal design, if you're interested in user experience, if you're interested in accessibility, you are at the right place at the right time, and the right content is about to come your way. I wanted to just say, we should all probably get to know each other. So let's go alphabetically, and with this around 1,000 people, just everybody say their name, their company, and their favorite summer memory. We'll start alphabetically. Go ahead. Just kidding. We do need to get to know each other, because this is one of those times where we're going to launch a poll question here. The benefit of this is I find that when we know, Kara and I know our audience as well, we can make the content more, you guessed it, accessible for all. And so here's the question. How familiar are you with accessibility? Just go ahead and click in. I can see everybody knows how to do it. Are you very familiar? Like you're an accessibility professional and it's part of your job? You're somewhat familiar? You know what accessibility is, but you want to learn more? Or you're not familiar, and that's why you're on this webinar. Now, my theory, before I get to see the results, is going to be that it's going to be over 50% number 2. And I'm saying that because it's kind of where our industry is right now. And we're going to leave this open for another 10, 15 seconds. I think it's number 2 because the industry is burgeoning and there's so much energy behind creating accessible experiences. And I bet you we're all here to kind of learn a little bit more. So, all right, sharing the poll results. Here we go. Oh, I hope everybody can see it, but if you can, I will tell you that 66%, 2/3 of the people are number 2, somewhat familiar. They know what accessibility is, but you want to learn more. Oh, are you in the right place or what? And at 1/4 of the folks are very familiar where accessibility is part of a primary part of your job. This webinar was created for all of these groups, and it's good for us to know that we have the majority in these two. Only 8% are not familiar, which is why you're on this webinar, and you're going to learn a whole lot. The content here is very purpose-built for the two groups of being somewhat familiar or very familiar. So I'm really, really, really excited about it. All right. So did everybody see those results? I think they did. I hope they did. Okay. Let's get to it. I like to, when I meet a group of people like this, set some ground rules. And one of those is that we're going to use phrasing today, accessible and accessibility, and also universal design quite a lot. So I wanted to define accessible first, and Kara will do a wonderful job of the universal design elucidation shortly. When you look at Webster's Dictionary of Accessible, you see that there's a lot of different versions of it. The ones with the arrows to the left are the ones that we're going to focus on today, which is a concept or content accessible, like an accessible film where something can be understood? And number 5, is it easily used or accessed by people with disabilities or adapted for use by people with disabilities? As we use the word accessible and accessibility today, I just wanted you to know the root in the dictionary definition here. The audience is large. There's 1.3 billion people with disabilities globally. The market is huge, and over 60 million people with disabilities make it the largest minority group in the US. And sometimes it's hard for us to imagine or think about the power in numbers like this. And so I just wanted to give you some of these statistics, where almost 20% of Americans self-identify as having a disability, 1 in 5 there. And here's the radiating, cascading influence of the disability market and why accessibility is so important, is that friends and family represent another 105 million consumers who have an emotional connection to disability. And emotion drives a lot of share of wallet when it comes to brand preference and brand selection. And so, as you know, working for those companies who are creating accessible experiences, when you project a disability-friendly image and you have the ability to connect emotionally to your consumers, you win. And people with disabilities control $2 trillion in income globally. So as we talk about this audience, it is a large audience that has really important spending power. And the 2 folks on the right are part of our documentary series, which you'll see a little clip of in a minute. As we get to know people with disabilities, I just wanted to say one thing, which is that universal design is one of the great user experience constructs of our generation. It's big. Universal design is this concept of designing all products and the built environment to be aesthetic and usable to the greatest extent possible by everyone. So this, of course, and for today especially, and for this webinar especially, includes the usability of digital products and user experiences, websites, mobile apps, online products by people with disabilities. This is going to be a great webinar. I just wanted to thank Carm and the UXPA education team for hosting. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to you, our wonderful Kara. Kara?
Thank you, Eric. So diving in and talking about some of the different types of disabilities. So Eric gave some statistics there. And what's important is when we're talking about web accessibility, we often think of the group of blind, low vision, because if unfortunately you look at the US, it's a very litigious environment. And a lot of the lawsuits that you've seen come from individuals that might be blind or low vision, having difficulty accessing or shopping on a website. So we sometimes think of it in that frame of mind when we're talking about web accessibility, but the reality of things is cognitive and neural are actually your largest group of individuals with disabilities. So when it comes from a design perspective, it's so important to be able to think through and visualize your design, your wireframes from that blind, low vision. But it's really that cognitive and neural of the design, the standardization of the templates, the structural areas and things like that are really going to hit home for that. So in that, we also want to look at going to the next slide as well. We look at how disabilities can be sometimes permanent, can be temporary, and sometimes can be situational. I love this visual from Microsoft because everybody is aware of Microsoft. And it's one that even though we are designing for individuals with disabilities, we really just don't know, out of that 19.3% that's self-disclosed within America alone, we don't know how more individuals may not maybe self-disclose, or we might have a car accident where it's only temporary. And a lot of times when we're building in accessibility, we also think of that blind, low vision as some of that area of web accessibility we hear about. The reality is the things that we need to do to make something accessible to the level of, to allow individuals who are blind or visually impaired to access that information, it trickles down to individuals with physical disabilities, with physical mobility, with cognitive and things like that. So when we're looking at that from a situational aspect, it's really helping that of the situational. So here we actually have a permanent, temporary, and situational, and we have touch, see, hear, and speak. And out of each one of those, we have a permanent and a temporary and a situational position that might affect someone that may have limited mobility. So a permanent might be someone with maybe only one arm, or something along those lines, where a temporary could be, we have a broken arm and we're not able to use the mouse at that point in time, whereas someone only using one arm might use voice recognition, or might be able to do well using just a mouse with maybe their non-dominant hand. But as a situational, maybe we have a new parent. And that new parent, you're now carrying around a newborn to where you only have one arm to be able to really access and use all of that, able to use a mouse or things like that. So looking at it from a permanent, temporary to situational across the board for different types of disabilities is really important. So when we go to the next slide, we also want to think about it from disability etiquette, because we're not just designing, but we're really writing for the web as well. And when we're doing so, we want to think about, as a design perspective, as a company, do we have an accessibility statement on the website? So that way, if someone with a disability does run into a barrier, do they know who to reach out to, how to let them know? It's not the webmaster necessarily if it's a technical problem, but really, who to go to, but more importantly, from a marketing standpoint from a company, letting your clients know, hey, we are taking accessibility seriously. So here's what we are doing, and here is our goal to be able to meet WCAG compliance. And here's the things that we have done to better our design, our development. And an accessibility statement can really help show that you are walking the walk as well as talking the talk. But not only that, we want to make sure that, universal design is huge when we talk about accessibility. And, not to dive in too much to some of these things, but if you would ever look at the universal design principles, there's 7 principles there. Usability has 5. If we talk about WCAG principles, WCAG for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, they have 4, and you'll see a lot of overlap across the board. But that multiple ways that you can have information of demonstrating some of the knowledge is making sure that you have a video as well as some of the text. And that way, someone who might be a better audible learner might be able to watch the video, whereas someone else might prefer to read the document that you have from there. But we also want to consider our audience. So our audience, thinking of it from that usability testing sometimes of, if I'm someone who's blind, am I still be able to access X information? If I'm someone who may be deaf or hard of hearing, am I still going to be able to get the information? Looking at it from usability. So, looking at this and really trying to apply it, we need to think of it from various different audiences. So a great example is the slide we had prior. It's a large visual from Microsoft. The alt text is there to describe everything within it, but for us to be able to show it and be able to talk about it within a time frame that we have, we really can show one or discuss one example of that from that situational, temporary, and permanent. But it gives examples of each of those for, whether you can see it, blind, low vision, deaf, hard of hearing, mobility, and things like that. So understanding and thinking about your target audience is huge. The last one is understanding that even though we're talking today about accessibility, it really is not just there to help everyone, or just not there to help individuals with disabilities. It's there to help everyone. So that's really the important aspect here of, it's beneficial of maybe English as a second or third language, maybe some older individuals starting to use the web from, an older age, things like this. So accessibility is going to benefit multiple users. So how do those individuals with disabilities use the web? And that's a huge question that's asked of us sometimes. So we want to go ahead and play a short snippet so you can actually hear from some of those individuals with disabilities and what web accessibility means to them, as well as some of the challenges or barriers that they might face. So Eric?
Yeah, I'm going to play it right now. I just wanted to let everybody know as it's streaming through this, this Zoom webinar, the video might be just half of a second behind, but if you can hear the audio, that's really the important part here. And at any point during the webinar, if you realize you want a one-on-one conversation with Kara and me, just email us directly at learn@essentialaccessibility.com, learn@essentialaccessibility.com. Here we go, Kara.
When you have a website that's not accessible to people with disabilities, you're basically hanging a sign outside the door that says your business is not welcome here. Hello, my name is Mark. I am visually impaired. I also like to use the word blind because I really can't see much.
My name is Stephanie. I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis when I was 18 months old.
This is Juan, my son, and he has cerebral palsy. He's my love. I do everything with him.
In 2004, 2005, nobody knew anything about web accessibility. Going online back then was a real disaster, was a real nightmare. Now fast forward to 2019.
Few buttons are clearly labeled.
We still have a lot of inaccessible web products, but there are standards.
If I didn't have any obstacles, I would spend a lot more time using technology.
For people like him, the world is not accessible.
So web accessibility is not only the right thing to do, but the right thing to do for business.
What is essential to me is having tools to navigate my day-to-day life.
I think we can change the stereotype. If people know more kids like him, there's a better way to see life.
I might look young, but I speak for an aging population.
Alrighty.
All right, thank you, Eric. So
Yes, and so I'll stop sharing and you can pick it up. And for everybody who is on the line, I just wanted to let you know that we will share the fully accessible video with folks with the follow-up email after this, along with the accessible recording.
all right, so moving along with that is learning the lingo. So the lingo is important. So here we have on the screen, and this is one of those of, you know, in the chat session, what else, you know, any word like that. If you want to type in something that might be unusual for you, please let us know, and we can kind of cover some of those. But here on Learning the Lingo, I'm going to give you the acronyms, purposeful, is W3C. We have WCAG, WCAG. AODA, AODA. We have Section 508. We have EN 301-549. We have ADA. We have Section 504. We have HTML and HTML5. We have CSS, ARIA, ARIA. We have VPAT, VPAT. We have HOH. We have A11Y. We have AT, and we have UD. So out of those, is there something that maybe pops up to say, you know what, that's the first time I'm hearing this? Throw something in chat or the QA and let us know. So that way, you know, it'll be interesting for us to kind of play in a little bit more to provide some of this context. So VPAT. Great. I'm so happy. Nick, thank you. Saying VPAT. So VPAT is for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. And that is something that you really should be asking your vendors, your third-party vendors that have a product of some sort. Do they have a VPAT? A VPAT is essentially an accessibility checklist that provides you some information on whether they support, partially support, or do not support the accessibility standards to give you a snippet, almost a window view of how accessible they might be. And so that's just something to to think about, especially if you're having to rely on a third-party chat system or a third-party maybe checkout system, things like this. You can put all the accessibility into your design and development, but if you are required to use something else that you can't control, then there's still going to be some accessibility there. So VPAT, and we actually have a VPAT webinar we've done in the past, so by all means reach out and we're happy to send that to you as well, because I don't want to stray away from the topic too much for today. A couple folks have said ALLY, A11Y. So A11Y is actually really big in Twitter. So if anybody tweets A, and then there's 11 letters between A and Y for when you spell out accessibility. And so A11Y is your hashtag when you tweet about accessibility. Another thing about Twitter is if you are tweeting and you have maybe 2 words like screen reader, to help with accessibility, make sure you capitalize the S and the R for screen reader. It helps with that as well. So we have AODA, someone mentioned, and that is Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. So AODA, as well as EN 301549 and Section 508, are all essentially your international language. WCAG is your WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that each area, has their own naming conventions, which AODA is one, EN 301549 is another, but WCAG is your international language, regardless of what some of the other areas might call it. So we have also, we have AT, and AT stands for Assistive Technology, so we'll dive right into that. And another one I saw very quickly was HOH is hard of hearing, so that's one that's sometimes used as well. So I may have missed some. I tried to catch as many as I could that popped up very quickly there. But we'll go ahead and move on from there. So if there's anything we missed, like Eric said, we're going to be sending this PowerPoint out. It's an accessible version, and we have all the meetings in that from there as well. So that AT, Assistive Technology. So it's really important to learn and understand when we're talking about assistive technology, how individuals use assistive technology, but more importantly, are there limitations to it, and what can we do with those limitations when it comes to accessibility? So assistive technology, we have some screen reading software, screen reading like JAWS, NVDA, which is non-visual desktop access, and also for VoiceOver as a Mac. These are popular screen readers of individuals who are blind might be using. Someone who's low vision often use screen magnifiers such as Zoom Text or maybe even Magic, but these are different types of assistive technology. You also have readers, some text readers, and text readers could be Browse Aloud, it could be Read Speak, it could be the built-in text reader of our own essential accessibility software. It's essentially allowing you to read text out loud. So next time you're in your Microsoft Word, actually go through and look at your ribbon, and there is a text reader within your Microsoft Office products now. So this is going to be really helpful for individuals who might learn better audibly and want to be able to follow along, or maybe some cognitive disabilities, different things like this. So there's a lot of different assistive technologies that we see that actually start to then get transferred into our everyday living. So speech recognition, we originally knew it as Dragon Naturally Speaking 20+ years ago, and that was where individuals with limited mobility would say, open Microsoft Word, and it would open Microsoft Word, and then you would start to tell it what to write, and it would type all of this. And in today's age, we have Siri, Alexa, Google, all of these things in our home or on our phones. And that technology was originally designed for individuals with disabilities, but due to universal design, we're using it every day and don't even realize it sometimes. So assistive technology is one part of the puzzle, and that's really your accommodation sometimes. If individuals are using assistive technology, that's what they need to be able to have access to something. But at the same time, even if they have access to the computer or access to the website, that website needs to be accessible, because sometimes there's going to be limitations that the assistive technology can't provide to them until we implement accessibility into it. So let's throw away the mouse next time we go to a website and just start tabbing through the keyboard. Can you access everything on your website? Does it go in a chronological order of top to bottom, left to right if you're in the States? What does this look like? If you can't get to something in that order, or you get stuck somewhere. Maybe you get to a page that has a video, and as soon as you tab to that video, it automatically takes to the full screen, but yet the escape key won't work to minimize it. That's a keyboard trap. So these are some of the limitations that individuals with assistive technology or maybe having to use a keyboard will run into that are quick and easy checkpoints for us to do our design and our development. But what happens is, as a solution, we need to make sure that we're designing our websites and our softwares to be able to work with keyboard alone, no mouse required. Another one for sometimes assistive technologies, it might not be able to read the content presented in images. So a solution for that on the accessibility side is making sure all of our images have an alt text. Alt text is thinking about it from, taking an image out of context. And this can apply to the same thing as the next one is, can you tab from link to link, or do the links have a proper meaning? So make links descriptive. So think of all of your images and all of your links completely taken out of context from your web page or your application and just pasted to the wall. And if you see them just by themselves, would they make sense? Because if we have an image and it needs an alt text, it could be the company logo. But maybe it could just be a smiley face and have no real importance whatsoever. There are different types of alternative text we can provide. A decorative image is something we use called a null alt text, which is an open and closed quote. If it is a link, we need to make sure that that link is descriptive to tell us exactly where that imaged link is going to go. If it's just a logo, we need to make sure that it's going to say the Essential Accessibility logo. And different things like this, but then take that same concept and apply it to links. How many click here's or read more or more infos do you have or might you see on some of your websites? If those don't tell you click here to get access to the webinar or read more about accessibility, just adding a couple words to help provide more instruction or description is going to go a long ways for individuals using assistive technology, because oftentimes they're looking at these things completely out of context because they can pull up a links list to be able to see everything that's on the page. Same thing with headings. Making sure it's that structural heading, and then also videos having captions or even audio description if it's needed. Audio description is for that of someone who is blind or severely low vision, and it describes what's going on. So your hierarchy of your headings, you should have one heading 1, and then you should use a heading 2, and then a heading 3. You can have multiple equal heading 2s or heading 3s, but you shouldn't jump from a heading 1 to a heading 5 just because you like the look and feel of things. So we talk a lot about, some universal design as well as some usability, as well as your WCAG. So I briefly mentioned that universal design has 7 principles. Usability has 5, and WCAG has 4. Out of that, so we've color-coded as well as put in the asterisks to be able to kind of show you the comparisons of these. But universal design, for example, principle 3 is simple and intuitive use. Well, usability has learnability and memorability. So you can kind of see how the two of those start to mesh, but then with WCAG you have understandable. So all 3 of these across 3 different sets of principles have some overlap. Universal design, equitable use, principle 1, and principle 7, size and approach and use, are very similar to robust for the WCAG of making something work for accessibility for the assistive technology. So we'll have that overlap as well across the board for multiple principles throughout all of these. And the point of what we're trying to say here is WCAG alone is really not enough when we are designing and developing to ensure the basic user experience for everyone. So we kind of have WCAG, universal design, and usability in this funnel kind of coming out to make equal access for everyone. So when we're looking at universal design, everyone benefits from accessibility. So I like to ask questions, and there are some hand raising features in here as well. So if you want to do that, please, by all means. But just think about how many times have you used voice recognition or a text-to-speech on your phone? I know I use this almost daily. So we get some people raising their hands so you can see, this is something, though it was designed originally to help someone with a disability, we often are using this. Another question is, have you ever zoomed into a web page or had, or maybe your mobile device to have it readable because it was too small to begin with? And we say, again, we start to see more hands raised. Another question is, have you ever used word prediction when you're typing or texting? A common one for this one is if you are on your mobile phone. I'm an Android user. So if you're on your mobile phone, you start to use that swipe technology, and it starts to guess what you're saying. These are all different features to help you with that word prediction. And then the last one is if you've ever walked playing on your phone from inside to outside and you've seen that automatic adjustment of your brightness to help you still be able to see, then that's another adjustment there that you've been able to see. So these are all benefits of universal design that everyone can access and benefit from.
Hey,
So,
Kara, this
yes.
is, we're getting some great questions coming in, and we're going to answer them at the end. I just wanted to remind everybody and let everybody know that we will attempt to get to all the questions at the designated Q&A time at the end of the prezzo, but please keep dropping them into the Q&A box in the Zoom toolbar there. Back to you, Kara.
All right, thank you, Eric. So really when we're talking about that is what is usability, and it's that quality attribute. So that really is that quality side that helps us start looking at basic user experience, and that is where we get into that design process. So our basic user experience has a small portion of accessible, but here on the screen we have usable, we have useful, usable, valuable, findable, credible, desirable, and accessible. So it's just a part of the larger picture that we're really starting to think of. So when we're doing this, we need to consider the effects of a couple things, and one is assumption. So we have a screen here of $100 bills, and imagine if I would say, okay, everybody has the same $100 bill from the same area, and we all have the same ruler, and I say measure a single bill from one corner to the next, and how large is it in centimeters? Well, the assumption could be we have the same ruler and we have the same dollar bill, we could have the same measurement. But the assumption of that is I didn't put detailed instructions to tell you which two corners. And the reality is we don't all think of things the same way. So which two corners would you have measured? The long side, the short side, the diagonal side? We don't know. So we can't assume everyone's going to follow instructions the same, especially if we have a lot of forms and fields and things like that. But we also can't assume everyone's going to use the site the same way when we do our design. The other one is perspective. So we have an image here on the screen, and it is a bridge or is it a fence? It just shows panel slots of wood, and we have some greenery up above it, and you really don't know if it's a bridge or if it's a fence. So our polling questions that's going to come up here is asking that question of, what do you see? Do you see a bridge or do you see a fence? And I'll go back and keep that picture up. So it's one of those of, keep in mind, there's no right or wrong answer here. And the point of this is it's perspective. We all see things differently. So when we are talking about our design and our development for that basic user experience, it's great to think about users with disabilities, but we really need to consider from that larger portion of that perspective, are we thinking about our design and development from a perspective of someone who might be blind or low vision? Or are we considering that from a perspective of someone with limited mobility, deaf or hard of hearing, and things like this? So we actually have 68% of individuals right now who see it as a bridge, and we have 35% of people who see it as a fence. And the beauty of it is no one's wrong, everybody's right. So when we're thinking about this in regard to perspective, perspective's everything. So we have an image here as the very top left is we have someone in an older car looking at someone in a newer car and says, wow, look at that new car. In the top right, we have someone on a bicycle looking at that same older car, and the person says, if only I could afford a car. And then we have the bottom left, and it's someone waiting at a bus stop watching that same person who was at a bike, and the person says, I wish I had a bike. And the very bottom right-hand corner is an individual sitting in a wheelchair on a balcony looking down at the very person who's at the bus stop to say he can go wherever he wants. So perspective is everything, and we really need to consider this when we start doing our design and development, because at the end of the day, it doesn't always turn out the way we thought. So the picture we have here is this beautiful sidewalk of how things were designed, and then this dirt pathway of where people have actually went in between to make a diagonal of where your corner sidewalk was, and that's the best user experience, your shortest distance from point A to B. So it doesn't always turn out the way we think, but that just means we need to think about new perspectives to ensure we're really designing and developing for all users, especially those with disabilities. So we are here to learn more about accessibility, and we really haven't dove in too much yet. There's just so much to really consider because we have to have that basics first to then really dive into the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. So again, we kind of threw out that lingo to say, you know, AODA and EN 301549. Those were a couple things that people had popped up. It is the international language, so regardless of where we're at or where a vendor might be that you're asking for that VPAT from, we all understand WCAG. Just know that WCAG 2.1 is the newest one out. It's been published for just over a year now, and it's going to be important to understand that out of those WCAG principles, there are 4 principles overall. And wanting to go back into that basic user experience is perceivable. As you're doing your design and your development, can everything be perceived? If there's an image there and I am blind, can I perceive that information otherwise through an alternative text? If I am someone who's deaf and there's a video, can I still perceive that through closed captions or a transcript? Maybe I'm someone who's colorblind, and can I still perceive what's being shown on the page because color contrast has been identified, or maybe patterns over top of some different charts and graphs allow me to see the difference in some of these colors. So is the things that you're creating, designing, developing perceivable by all of those different perspectives of different individuals with disabilities? Operable is going to basically say, hey, can I operate it? Throw that mouse away and say I can only use a keyboard. Can I still operate it? Can I still get to my clear structure? Can I still see the headings? Can I get to the links? Can I play or pause a video? Is it going to make sure that if I can get to a link, is it going to be descriptive enough to know that it's going to take me where I want to go? So we kind of have to look to see, is it going to be operable? Are we able to use what we need to use? The next one is understandable, and understandable is huge when it comes to content creation, but also equally as part of design, because the templates that we're looking at, how systematic are they? How similar are they from one to the other for me to be able to easily find the information that I'm looking for? Is it a consistent experience? How clear are the directions? Kind of talking about that assumption of those $100 bills, how clear are the instructions for our forms? Am I going to know exactly what I need? If I'm having to fill out a password, are you giving me all the requirements before I create one, or only after, once I don't meet the uppercase, lowercase numbers and symbols or whatever that might look like? So as much content as you can put in for understandable is important, and that universal language is about your 7th or 8th grade language. And then we finally have robust, and robust is a little bit more on your developer side, but it's also, everywhere else as it trickles down, because everyone can check for accessibility. We all have roles and responsibilities, and we all can do something along the lines of checking for accessibility. But ultimately, robust is making sure that it's going to work with assistive technology, and sometimes that requires a little bit more coding using what we use there in that lingo area of ARIA, and that's where some of your developer area kind of comes into play a little bit more. So in this instance, we have a benefits of accessibility, and we've really talked a lot about how it benefits everyone, but allowing more users to access your website and use your services can maximize your users and retain your customers. And with that, that's huge. And advertising advancements for accessibility to show the work that you're doing as maybe that accessibility statement, it could even, it could generate different business and help you even from a competitive advantage. So accessibility built in using that universal design and usability, it can also help increase productivity for everyone, not just your end users, but also internal for your employees as well. And if you are designing for accessibility internal, then you will also help have an employee loyalty, and you start to attract more individuals because you're not doing it just for your clients, but you're also doing it internal for your internal applications and things as well. So designing with accessibility in mind is always easier and cheaper if you do it from the start of the project rather than at the end. But at the same time, we want to make sure that you understand the difference between barriers and accessibility. So the image we have here, we have 3 images. In the very first image, we have 3 different individuals, tall, medium, and short, all in the same box, to where they're trying to watch a baseball game over a fence. And only the tall person can really get a good view. The medium-sized person can kind of see, but the short person can't see at all. And what this is saying is basically everyone can benefit, but if they have the same supports, they're not really being treated equally here. And there's going to be a barrier still in place. Whereas the second picture is it's the same three people, but now instead of the tall person having that same box, they gave that box over to the shortest person to where now everyone's able to see over the fence, to where now that second image is basically saying, you know, the individuals are given different supports to make it possible to have the equal access, but now they're not being treated equally because there's different supports here. Whereas the third image is now no boxes, no supports, but the reality is that wooden fence that people couldn't see over or see through is taken away, and that was the barrier. The fence was a barrier to where now there's a chain link fence. Everyone is able to see it regardless of how short or tall they might be, with no accommodation needed. And that's really what we're wanting to talk about, is barriers and accessibilities. We need to focus on that barrier, not the disability. And barriers can be attitudinal, it could be technological, it could even be business policy. Let's talk about design and branding guidelines. What's going to trump what when we talk about color contrast? Is it going to be design and branding that trumps accessibility, or is it going to be accessibility that trumps design and branding? We could have that conversation all day long. So just to kind of finish you out a little bit to help understand what some of the main content areas are when we talk about those barriers, we've broken them down per types of different disabilities. So we have blind, low vision, and colorblind all lumped into one for visual. So if there's any visual content, we need to make sure that there's going to be an alt text. And the same thing applies if there's going to be a video. We need to make sure there's some audio description. Functional elements and things, and your hierarchy of your structured content, making sure the headers are proper, and throw away that mouse and start keyboarding everything. Can you access it? Is it consistent navigation? Is there going to be a lot of complex information, and is it going to be overlaid, or is it going to be designed out to where there's going to be some white space and easily navigable through everything? What happens if there's a time limit? You know, if we ever do some online banking, you get that pop-up to say, hey, in 60 seconds you're going to be signed out due to inactivity. Is that an unexpected action that might then redirect you and sign you out automatically because it didn't pop up and take focus? So these are a lot of the different types of barriers that you might see. But the point of this is, aside from blind, low vision, and colorblind, we look at deaf and hard of hearing, and sometimes the barriers there is it might be a video without captions, or an MP3 without a transcript, or it might be a face-to-face to where there's not CART services or more sign language services. But those are the two main areas, because what we show then is the barriers related to mobility disabilities are different items that are asterisked because they are overlapped and found as barriers also applying to blind, low vision, and colorblind. So when we talk about web accessibility from one of those very early slides, it trickles down to help multiple groups with disabilities. So, you know, making sure that you throw away that mouse, making sure that you can use the keyboard, making sure there's some time limits and you can still access that information. Same thing for cognitive and learning. You have a lot of asterisks showing the duplication that it already applies to one of the other different disabilities. So there's things that trickle down across the board. So just kind of leaving you with a quick list of some of the 7 common barriers. We're happy to go and dive into those if you ever want to reach out to us and talk about them a little bit more. But really, with that said, I know we have a lot of questions coming up. We had an added video in here just in case there was time to show that gives some of the top 10 accessibility topics. And in this instance, we aren't there. So I advise you to go back and look at that when we have some time, but I'd like to make sure we have some time for questions. So end of all of this is making sure that we work smarter, not harder. We have, you know, we have the area here that is a cartoon, and we have a lot of snow, and we have an individual shoveling the snow off the stairs, and we have a large group of people waiting for it to be cleared for them to get in. And we have a person in a wheelchair that says, could you please shovel the ramp? He says, well, all these other kids are waiting to get up the stairs. When I get through shoveling for them, then I'll clear off the ramp. But the reality is, you know, but if you shovel that ramp, then we can all get in. And it's that work smarter, not harder. It's that universal design. It's that basic user experience, that usability, in addition to accessibility, that's really going to make a great design, a great development of an application or a website, even a document. So just closing that out as, three main principles for designers is designing with accessibility means inclusive. Making sure that you include your target users, thinking about those different perspectives, thinking of it from a diverse set of how are all these different individuals going to use my design or use my application or use my product. And the better the accessibility is, the better the design is, the more different, or the more perspectives that you're looking at from different views. So we kind of ran through things just to give you some thinking started, and I want to hand it back over to Eric and Kelly and see what kind of questions we have.
Thank you, Kara. This was really good. And actually, we do have quite a few questions. This is Carm on the line, and I know that Eric and Kelly are going to jump in a second. But I know one that came in was, I'm newer to usability. What's the difference between usable design and universal design?
Sorry, I muted myself. So looking at the question was, what's the difference between universal and usable?
That's correct. Universal design and usable design.
All right. So when we are looking at universal versus usable, it's really just, it's becoming a term at this point. I mean, they've kind of emerged through the years to where accessible design is still a design process. And in that instance, people with disabilities need to be considered. But when we're talking about more of a usable design, then usable design is really making it efficient to use for everyone. And that universal design is kind of that in-between of how we really integrate and use things that were benefited by how it was designed originally with disabilities.
Thank you, Kara, for that. And Eric, I see we have a number of open questions that Eric intends to answer live. So Eric, why don't you go ahead and take that away?
Absolutely. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you.
Kara, there's so many questions here. Let's start with a couple of ones that came in early as you were talking about alt text and things. Is there a comparable alt text for links? And one of the attendees actually said there's the title attribute for links that can be used to give more information about the link. But I wondered if you can comment on that original question. Is there comparable alt text for links, and any guidance on that?
So when we are talking about images, we need to consider the context of what that image is. So is it a decorative image? That would have that no alt text. If it's going to be an image that is a link, so maybe it's our logo, and when you click on it, it takes you to the home page versus another page that you might be on, then it needs to still be able to say, essential accessibility homepage. It needs to have a description to let you know where it's going or what it's doing as a link versus if it's just an image that's still important enough to have an alt text, that alt text could still be essential accessibility logo, but it's not letting you know that it's actually going to the home page itself. Assistive technology, a lot of times, if it's a link, it's going to read you link and let the individual know. But when we're talking about images being used, maybe it's a button, for example. Is that button submitting something? Is it a submit button, or does it just say button? That's where an alt text might need to have it as submit button. So alt text is a larger discussion and kind of usually showing some examples to that. But just thinking of how it's used out of context to see what it's going to be needed for.
I think there's a quick sidebar question to that, which is, can you comment on the concept of the quote unquote learn more buttons or links, and where does accessibility believe those kinds of phrasing should be? Is it okay to have learn more with the link, or is there another way to do it?
So keeping it more, from a designer's perspective, because if we can talk ARIA, but ARIA is it's an accessible, rich internet application. It's a certain code that most developers are using, and there are some things as a handoff communication-wise from a developer to a designer that they can have these conversations to let developers know what it needs to say or can do, and developers can write in some of this additional code, but ultimately it really could be fixed more from a designer standpoint of, if it says click here, make sure it's saying click here, about accessibility, or click here, whatever it is. Adding just one or two more words to help with that descriptive link is going to make it more usable. But if for design perspectives, that can't be done, then it falls to the responsibility of a developer to have to use ARIA code, so then a screen reader is still going to be able to read, click here about accessibility. But the thing that happens is ARIA code is only going to help individuals who are blind using screen readers. It's not going to help individuals who might have cognitive disabilities using a text reader and things like that. So it always falls back to, it's best to add those descriptions into the links to let you say more information about accessibility. So instead of just more information being linked, add in the for accessibility as well.
That's really awesome. And I think that answers Charlotte's question about, talking about ARIA to make sure it links more descriptive. So that was, you got 2 for 1 there, Kara. Well done. Here's one, from a designer standpoint, do I need to use different fonts for different header levels, or is font size sufficient?
So that is a great question. When we're talking about fonts, always look at your sans serif type fonts. And when we're talking about sans serif fonts, a common best practice is 12 to 14 point font. Because if we look at it and say, Arial 12 might look very similar to, say, Verdana 14. You just don't know. But, looking at this, keep with a sans serif font. That is the most important, because some of the fonts bleed a little bit, a term we use, bleed, for those cognitive disabilities, dyslexia, things like this. So there's a lot of fonts that are hurtful to individuals with disabilities. So sticking with that sans serif is important, and sticking with more of that consistency as well, but looking at the font size and making sure that your headers look more like headers and not the same font as your text is also going to be important for just more of that visual, that cognitive, and items like that as well.
Awesome. Stephanie, thank you for that question. That was awesome. Here's another one kind of in that zone, which is Melissa asks, what do you recommend for an accessible version of an infographic or a complex display of data? Is a written description enough?
That is a great question. So, all right, let's take it from maybe a chart example. And if I put in, maybe we're showing a pie chart of this past year's, customers, and maybe the location of where those customers are. So we have a pie chart that might be broken down into, say, 7 different areas and give us percentages of all of the customers from around the world of those places. You might be able to add an alt text to say, what I just described is that summary, but then be able to go into, say, U.S. was 20%, Canada was 15%, blah, 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 and that could be enough. Whereas if it's maybe more of a chart or graph or something that is almost like that smart art is the way I think of it, as from your Microsoft products, that might require some data sometimes to help with a universal design concept. Why not also put in that table that shows the exact data? So if we're using a chart that's a bar chart, I might not be able to see, even without a disability, are we talking 2.5? Are we talking 2.2 1/4? Where is it within that 2 to 3 marker? I can't really tell. So, then imagine that from an alt text description. Whereas if you have that same information from a table format and you also submit that into a table and then make that table accessible with your table headers, then not only are you providing accurate information, but then you're also providing a multiple means of interpretation. And you can also use your alt text as the information that's in the chart. So you can actually, as that image of that chart or graph, you can put a nice summary of what that chart or graph is, but you can actually see table, figure 1.5, whatever it is, and that can give you then the exact information you need. So there's a lot of different things that you can do for images and infographics.
You've been going. So there is actually a question that actually I can answer here. So you could take a quick breath. And the question here is, can I get access to the documentary that we saw at the beginning of the webinar? And I'll just answer that yes. The documentary was created for you, for everybody, for the world to use freely. And we created it interviewing those 4 people. And you can access it at essentialaccessibility.com/blog/all-the-same, or you can email me at learn@essentialaccessibility.com and I'll reply with the link. There is the 2-minute version that you saw. We have a 4-minute version of that, and then individual profile videos for the awesome participants. Mark, who's visually impaired, Nike, who's deaf, Steph, who has rheumatoid arthritis and kind of does this speaking for the aging population, and then Juan Sr. and Juan Jr. Juan Jr. has cerebral palsy. And so we've got some good profile videos of them to talk about accessibility. See, that was an easy question for me. We've got so many good questions. I actually have a good one for you, and it's kind of a little bit of a softball, so I'm just gonna get this out of the way. Minghua Sun asked, do you have any recommendations on how to do a comprehensive accessibility audit? I don't know if I want to spend too much time on that, Kara, but I mean, I will just say that is the essential accessibility business, is to do comprehensive accessibility audits. And we don't want to take any time doing any kind of salesy stuff on this call. So Minghua, if you could just send me an email at learn@essentialaccessibility.com. Kara and I will be able to get on the phone with you directly and talk about it. Okay, Aaron has a good question here, which is, as I understand, we're supposed to use alternative text tags for images for people using screen readers. A colleague was wondering if a descriptive caption could be used instead of alt tags, and could you please provide some guidance on that? You're on mute.
Thank you. So that is a great question. And, you know, a lot of times when we see the alt text versus a figure or caption is, you know, when we're looking at that, is the attribute being applied directly to the image? Because, and let me step back from this. Let's apply it to maybe say we're looking at a textbook or something. And in a textbook, you might have a paragraph that starts talking a lot about that era of history, about modern art. And maybe then you have a picture of that specific modern art, and then you might have a figure that kind of gives an overall summary of what that is. And it could be figure, you know, Picasso, I don't know, Starry Night. But then maybe the portion of that is the importance of that alt text could actually be talking more about the types and colors of paint that are being used and things like that. And that's really what could be meant for that alt text, not necessarily the figure. The figure helps as a summary, but there still may be needed more of an alt text from there. So, you know, that is not an easy answer to give, because we have to, again, go back and look at the context. Even if a figure is made there, an alt text of some sort, maybe a null alt text, would still need to be given to make sure it doesn't read image blank.
Okay, good one, good one. You know what, I wasn't going to mention it, but there's more than a few people who have asked, and so we'll make this our last question, and I'll lead off the answer, which is, what are your thoughts on the Dominos versus Robles accessibility case that's headed towards the Supreme Court, and you know, what does it mean for accessibility and the future of accessibility? I will say that I participated in a very spirited discussion that's linkable on our blog on a radio show called Air Talk. A great 15-minute discussion about that. So if you want to learn about the case and just get smart on it and hear our perspective on it, you can do that through our blog. Generally, I would say, and I'll hand it over to you, Kara, for the last word, a gap between things being inaccessible and things being accessible, and that there's energy behind making the world accessible, both in the physical world and in the digital world. I think that's good. So whatever this case materializes and wherever it goes, to the Supreme Court or to the Ninth Circuit, again, whatever happens there, I think it's good. And I'm really, I think it's an important case for us historically, and we'll say that, you know, as we look back in time. But the fact that people are talking about it and we are getting more to a place of full accessibility, I think that's important. Kara?
I think you answered that well.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, we are up on time. Carm, I know you have some closing remarks. And before I go, I just wanted to say I so appreciate your time. So many people attended, so many people registered. We love what we do here at Essential Accessibility. We love sharing ideas and ideals of what universal design can and will be. So if you want to talk to us about it, certainly email us at learn@essentialaccessibility.com. Over to you, Carm.
Absolutely. And thank you, Kara and Eric, for joining us today for this accessibility talk. It was wonderful. I'm so glad you were able to get to the Domino's question, because I myself was curious about it as well, just to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions. And for those who are attending, thank you guys for attending. Thanks for your participation. Again, be sure to check uxpa.org for other upcoming webinars and short courses. We are now at time. Again, all of the recordings and resources will be provided to you guys. So everyone, take care and have a great rest of your afternoon. Goodbye.